Hey guys, today we're putting together these Roman style courtyard walls that surround our garden. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is the last heavy design, heavy art episode for a while, so if you're not all into it, I completely understand. Next episode we're on to more pragmatic stuff. But this was the final step to put the finishing touches on our garden. It needed a courtyard. And for this, I wanted to see if I could just use Quixel Bridge assets and come up with the best classical looking courtyard that I could envision. And if you follow along, by the end of this episode, you'll have a completely modular, infinitely extendable Roman courtyard system. So here's the process we're going to follow this episode. As always, just consult the spreadsheet link in the description below. You can get every single one of these assets that we're going to use off of Quixel Bridge. One important thing, for all the assets, you can download them at nanite quality, except for the roof tile asset. Download that at low quality. And I know that's weird, but we're going to have a ton of these roof tiles, and all together, when they're packed all together, I noticed when they're really high quality, it's very difficult to move and navigate with them. And the player is never going to be so close to the roof tiles that they're going to notice the difference. A couple of episodes, we talked about the idea of having packed level actors within packed level actors. And we're basically going Super Saiyan on that idea today. Whenever you're trying to do a really big build, really any big insurmountable problem, the key is to break it down into its pieces. You start at the smallest level of analysis, smallest level of abstraction, and work our way up. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So once you download and organize all the content, we have some preparation steps before we can get to it in earnest. So the first thing I recommend is let's navigate outside of our garden, or just navigate to an open area. So I'm going to navigate to this part of our water quadrant here, turn back my camera speed down to something normal. So now we're ready to start dragging in our assets, and we need to change some of the properties before we start building. And the other thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create some brand new shapes with modeling tools that we need for the build. So to start, I have a new content browser here just so I can quickly drag in our assets. And you could just line them up like I'm doing here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up our stairs here to blend into the landscape a little bit differently than the settings we currently have in place. And if you come down to the global scalar parameters here, I'm just going to change the virtual blend height to 1.05, a little bit lower, and the same for the sharpness down to 20. And that's going to still allow it to blend, but just a lot less than it is currently. Alright, so our stairs here are going to be kind of the anchor in terms of sizing things. So everything else is going to be scaled up in relation to the stairs. So the first thing are these castle walls. We're going to scale those up to just 2 by 2 by 2. Then if you come over to this mossy chapel arch, that's going to be 2.2, 2.2, 1.7. The Roman arch over here, this is also going to be a little bit bigger, so 1.2, 1.2, and a little bit taller, 1.3. The Roman column, same kind of thing, but not quite as tall for the column, so it's going to be 3 by 3 by 2. And then the Roman marble capital here, this is going to be at the top of our pillars. These are going to be 3 by 3 by 3. Roman marble plinth, don't know how to pronounce that, 1.6, 1.6, 1.6. And for each of these Roman trims here, you can select both of them. They're going to be 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. And then the roof tile, which you can barely see, that's going to be a little bit larger. So we're going to make that 2 by 2 by 2. And our walkway here, that's going to remain exactly the same. So we are good to go on sizing. Next, we got to change the color tone of a few of these assets. So the first one is this Roman marble capital. So if we come into the material, and if we go right into the texture, for this we got to change both the brightness curve and the RGB curve to be 1.2, just a little bit darker. And then for the arch here, same kind of thing. So if we come into the material, come down to our texture, this is going to actually be a little bit lighter, so 0.8 and 0.8. Over to our trim. So both of these are going to be 1.1, 1.1. Now onto this Roman marble plinth. If you go into the material and come down to the texture, we're actually going to change 3 things here. So it's going to be 1.1 for the brightness curve, the saturation, and the RGB curve. So make sure you get the saturation with that one. Last one, but also the most complicated. If you come on over to the decorative statue, go into the material, back over to the texture. Same thing here, we're going to make the brightness curve 1.1, saturation 1.1, RGB curve 1.1. Don't exit out completely yet, so exit out of the texture, but back in the material, we have to actually change the tint a little bit. So right now it's this gray, I want to change it to be more of a brown. So if we select the albedo tint up here, select the color, and I played around a lot with this on the color wheel, but what I found works best is something like G 0.8 and B 0.6, and that gives it kind of an orange-brown tone. And then the last thing with this statue is just change the scale to be a little bit smaller, 0.9, 0.9, 0.9. So now we have some child materials we have to create as well. So if you go to your content drawer, go back to your Megascans surfaces, and I sorted all these surfaces, all the materials that we downloaded into this walls folder. You can do the same. And we're going to go into this Roman limestone wall here. Go into the child material. We're going to change the rotation angle to be 0.25. And then afterwards, we need to duplicate this one actually 4 times. So right click, duplicate. And this one is going to be 2 times tiling. And right click, duplicate again. This one's going to be 4 times tiling. Duplicate again, 8 times tiling. That's for objects that are very big. And then duplicate it again. And this one actually is going to be half tiling. And that's going to be for objects very small. And then the last one is a weird one. So right click, duplicate it. I'm just naming this tiling stretched. So it's going to tile more in one direction than the other. And then we just need to modify the materials. So the first one, this is the 2x2. So let's go to tiling 2x2. And do the same thing for each of these. So 4x4. The ants go marching 8x8, hurrah. For the half tiling one, that's just going to be 0.5, 0.5. And for the tiling stretched one, this one's a little different. So this is actually going to be a rotation angle back to 0. And for the tiling of this, the X is going to be 0.4, while the Y remains the same at 1. All right, so we got all our materials figured out. So now we got to change the material out on these chapel assets. Obviously, that's not going to work with the motif of the Roman stuff. So if you select the arch first, we're just going to switch out the material here with Roman _ limestone and select the very top one, which is the original. And now onto our 2 piscines here. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So again, we're going to search for Roman limestone wall. We're going to search for the second one. That's the 2 times tiling. Yep, this one right here. And the same with this one. And if you want to compare these, you can kind of line them up next to each other and see how they look. All right, so now we have to create a few different shapes. And the easiest way I found to do this is to first start assembling some of these pieces so we know the right size and scale of the shapes we need to make. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take our wall and I'm going to copy, paste, so we're going to duplicate it, and then I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees, and we're going to start assembling one of our pieces here. You want to bring these walls roughly at the same height as the top of the stairs so that they overlap slightly. And then we can select all of them, just bring them slightly lower so that they're faded into the landscape. So now on to our columns. So for this, we've got to get our plinth. Plinth is one of those words I have no idea how to pronounce. And we bring it over. And for these, because they're kind of chipped on one side, what I ended up doing is just Control-C copy, Control-V paste, and I just rotated one of them 90 degrees. And so then we have 2, and I can copy and paste and move over the other ones to the other side. Then we got our columns, and for these, you want the columns to be slightly below the top of the plinth. So you want them kind of fading into the plinth. And last but not least, our lovely marble capitals over here. I'm going to move them over. And also for these, you want these slightly embedded into the pillar. So not just resting on top, but kind of into it a little bit. And once it's properly positioned, you can copy and paste it, move it right over. So far, so good. So now we've got our arch. I'm gonna move that over, put that on top of the 2 different capitals here. But even before our arch, I forgot a couple things. I forgot these 2 Roman trim. And so for these, you want to make sure they're also just slightly in front of the columns here, right in front of the capitals. So you want to move them back as far as you can without that happening, and a little bit over the lip. And the reason we have 2 is so we can have a variable pattern. So if you get in really close, you can tell that it's lining up. And then you just need to move it over until it blends properly. And then what you can do is just duplicate a few of these. And I can even duplicate the same one and bring it to like the halfway point. It's going to look different. And I know I forgot to mention this, but I've got my position grid snap value set to 1. So it's snapping at the smallest possible increment. And you want them basically to cover the entire pillar. It doesn't have to go over the pillar. But basically what we're going to have is these modules of pillars overlapping. So at any given place where the pillar is, there's actually going to be 2 pillars there. And it's going to overlap some of these. So there is going to be some blending, some variation there. So now I can lower the arch down into position. And I'm going to move it out to be right on top of. All right, so now we've got enough of a structure here to compare against our shapes that we make in the world. So the first thing I want you to do is come up here to the plus sign and go to shapes and select cube. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this cube about 5 times, and that's going to give us a starting point to make different shapes. So if you right click over here on the cube in the details panel and say copy, so come back into our content drawer. I'm going to navigate over to our 3D assets and then our walls. And right here, I'm just going to Control V and paste. And then I'm going to right click. I'm just going to duplicate this 4 more times. So duplicate. So our first cube here, if I right click, go to rename, this is going to be triangle, not a cube, triangle. And the second one is going to be our archway backdrop. So cube 2 is going to be back wall. Cube 3 is going to be small square pillar. And cube 4 is going to be tall square pillar. So this archway backdrop is actually going to be on the other side of this. Like it's going to be a square, but it's going to be hollowed out in the middle here. But we also need our main archway here. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in a cylinder. So if I come back to shapes, cylinder, and same sort of thing. So I'll right click, copy, and then in our content drawer, I'll just paste that in. And this one, right click, I'm going to rename to archway. Then I can delete out the cylinder here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag all of these into the world. So we've got our archway. So starting with the triangle here on the right hand side, I'm going to change the scale to 5, 0.2, and 5. Now for the archway backdrop, it's going to be 5, 0.1, and 2. For the actual archway, so the first thing is we got to rotate it towards the camera. So just like that. The scale of this is going to be 4.5, 3.5, and 1. And what you want to do is you want to get that as close to the actual archway as possible just to make sure it's comparably sized. So I'm just going to move it into position here, right about that. And a little bit over. Yeah, so you want it to be overlapping. Doesn't need to be perfect, but roughly about that size. Now for our back wall here, this is going to be large and thin, so 5 by 1 by 6. And then for our small square pillar, this is going to be 0.4, 0.4, and 1. And for our large scale pillar, this is going to be 6 by 0.8 by 0.8. And the reason that this is sideways is that the material is going to be aligned such that when it faces up, the bricks are actually sideways. So now on to modeling mode. I'm going to start with the triangle. We're going to go over to modeling. And the first thing we're going to do here is a simple plane cut, which we've done before. So under try model plane cut, and we're literally just going to cut a triangle. So we just rotate it 45 degrees. Is that a perfect isosceles triangle? It's been too long. And then hit accept. The next thing we're going to do is a new thing actually. So on this triangle, we're going to come down here to X-form UV. And you see how the squares there are kind of small? So this triangle is actually going to be the outside of a building. And we want the size of the tiling to be pretty large because these are big bricks on the outside of the walls. And so I'm basically going to stretch these out. So if we select the X-form UV, select a facet of the triangle, and we can use these little kind of like half rectangle things to kind of stretch out the UVs in each direction. So I'm going to do it for the green and for the red. And I'm going to make them roughly twice the size that they are here. So that's good, and we can hit accept. We could just do this on the other side as well. And the next thing we're going to do is set this triangle to be a normal scale of 1 by 1 by 1 instead of this 5 by 0.2 by 5. And so the way we do that is we come up here to bake RS, and that's going to take the current dimensions and bake that as the normal transform, the 1 by 1 by 1 transform. And there we go. So now it's 1 by 1 by 1. And so the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the mesh, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to add a 26 DOP collision. And also we're going to enable nanite support, because even though this is a tiny number of total triangles, so we see that 34 and 42, just a good practice, might as well enable nanite and everything. So now over to our archway. So for this, we're also going to do a plane cut. And for this, I got to flip it over 180 degrees and accept. And then we're also going to bake the rotation and scale. Yep, set that back down to 1, 1, 1. And so now the same thing, we're just going to give a collision, enable nanite, and we're all set. And now on to our archway backdrop. So for this one, it's a little bit different. Instead of using our plane cut, we're actually going to use this poly cut feature. And so this is going to allow us to actually cut an arch in it. And so the way we're going to do that is first I'm going to rotate the cutting 90 degrees. So you should have a perfect circle. Well, not perfect, but close enough. And now what we're going to do is we're going to increase the width of that circle. And we're also going to increase the number of subdivisions. So the subdivisions is going to be 64, and that's going to make it more circle-like. Because if I go back to 12, you see how it's like, it's like a polygon instead of a circle. 64 is enough that it really looks like a circle. And for the width of that circle, we're going to bump it up to 500. And now we got to move it down considerably. So you want the narrowest point up top to be roughly equal to the narrowest point on the sides here. So maybe up a little bit. Yeah, that looks good. And then accept. And the last thing we're going to do is the same exact thing. We're just going to bake our rotation and scale. So now onto our back wall here. For this, I'm actually going to build some of the structure here just to get a sense of what's appropriate for where we need to cut. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take our walkway, drag it all the way over, street cobblestone. Got to rotate that 90 degrees. We don't need to worry about turning off the blending with the landscape because it's going to be floating up a little bit. And for this, I'm just going to move it to be directly positioned just underneath the brick right here. And the brick should just barely be poking out the side of the wall. So this wall is going to end up being right about here. And you know what? To get a better view of this, I'm just going to change the position of the sun. This is a good trick to know. So you can go into the directional light here. You can actually change the rotation of the sun this way. 60. Whoa, that's not going to work. Let's say negative 120. There we go. So now the sun is on this side because I think it was about negative 60. Yeah, negative 60 puts it over there. Negative 20 puts it on the other side. And so now I can actually see what I'm doing. So this wall is going to come down basically to the ground. But before that, I'm going to take one of these stone walls, copy it, move it over to the other side, and actually going to move it up. And you also want it blended in with the stones over here. So they're not going to line up perfectly because they're slightly different sizes, but I basically lined it up with the grout. And so this wall is going to be up against the little wall here, like that. And you want it roughly flush with this floor. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to shrink the UVs long ways a little bit. So come back down to X-Form UVs, select that facet, and we're just going to drag it up until it looks just about like squares. And I try to actually line it up at the top. So if we move it up a little bit, right about there, that looks good. And then as always, we're going to bake the rotation and scale. So now we've got to do a poly cut again. But this one's a little different. So instead of a circle, it's going to be a rectangle. But first I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees again. And now we're going to change it to be, instead of a circle, a rectangle. And the width of this one is going to be 50 and the height 250. We want to position this properly. So it's going to be right about here. We want to start that right where the wall intersects with the big wall. So that's looking good, accept. And so for our last two, these are really easy. So we're going to select our first one. We're just going to bake the rotation and scale for this. Bake, rotation, and scale, accept. Same for that one over there. Bake, rotation, and scale, accept. The last thing I'm going to do is just make sure to enable collision and nanite support for all of these. So go into each of these, select collision, add 26 DOP. That looks just fine. Nanite support. All right, so now we're ready to add materials to all these. So our triangle, we're going to search for MI Roman limestone, and we're going to pick the very top one. Yeah, so it should have giant blocks just like that. That's perfect. And now for our archway, this is a unique material. We haven't touched this one yet. MI Roman marble ornate, and it's actually our second one here. Now, that's not right? So if you double click on the material, here's what we need to do to adjust. So the first thing is the rotation's off. So I have to select the rotation angle and then 0.25. So now we got to change the tiling. So I'm going to select the tiling checkbox, and for tiling X, I'm going to make this 1.7. Same with tiling Y. And for the offset X, 0.05, and I'm just trying to center these three figures. And then the offset Y, 0.07. And the offset, I don't think we've done that before, but what that's doing is it's moving the material up a percentage of the total tile. So the overall size of the tile is being adjusted here, 5% and 7% respectively. These are always on a scale from 0 to 1 or 0 to -1. So now on to our archway backdrop. So for this, we're also selecting the MI Roman marble ornate, and this is going to be the first one. And the same kind of thing, we'll go into the material. And so for this one, we don't need to adjust the rotation angle. We're all set there, but we do need to adjust the tiling. So I'll select that. Tiling X will be 1.4, and the Y is going to remain consistent here. And the offset X is going to be 0.55, and the offset Y will be 0.07. And what that's going to do is going to put the figures just in the corners there. And now on to our back wall here. So for this, we're going to search for the MI Roman limestone. And for this, we're going to choose the 2 times tiling here. Now, instead of rotating just like this, I'm going to go into the material and I'm going to rotate it sideways. I just think it looks better. So rotation angle back to 0, uncheck that, save. Yeah, so if it looks like that, you're all set. And then our small square pillar here. So this one is also one of the variations of MI Roman limestone, and it's the last one, tiling stretched. And now onto the tall square pillar. And for this one, same thing, but this is going to be the 4 times tiling one. 4 times tiling. And we actually need to go into that, and we got to change our tiling a little bit. So the tiling Y instead of 4 is going to be 0.6. And we're also going to get rid of the rotation angle. And so then when I rotate this up 90 degrees, it should look just like this. So now that we've got all of our building blocks here, it's time to move up a level. And this is a modular wall system, and the way we're making it modular is with packed level actors. So we're going to start with the smallest level, the smallest packed level actors, and then we're going to move up to a larger level and finally get to the largest pieces where we begin to assemble our wall. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder under 3D Assets Walls, and we're going to call it _PackedLevelActors. And then I'm just going to give it a color to differentiate. So set color to green. So we'll go into that. And then 2 new folders under here. We're going to have our size 1. This is our smallest size packed level actors. And then we have our size 2. And in the main folder, I'm going to have our actual pieces for the wall. So we're going to start with our marble pillar here. So I'm going to select the pillar, the capital, and the plinth, and just one of the 2 down below. And I'm just going to change the rotation of these to be 180 degrees. And that's going to give them some variance. The other thing I've got to do is I've got to move the capital up a little bit to the edge. So now that we have 2 distinct pillars, we can save them as 2 distinct packed level actors. So I'll select all 4 pieces on the left, and then I'm going to right click and create packed level actor. Center min Z is fine. And we're going to navigate to our MegaScans 3D Assets Walls into our packed level actors folder size 1. And this is going to be pillar 1. And so now we'll do the same thing with the right pillar. So we'll select everything. And this one's going to be pillar 2. Now with both of these pillars, we're going to reposition them a little bit. So if you want to select both, we're just going to position them flush pretty much with the stairs here, with the ground. So it's okay if there's just a little bit sticking out above. Next are stairs. So I'll select these 2 walls and the stairs. I won't select this back one because this is going to be part of the walkway. This one I'm going to name Stairs 1. So now we're going to do the walkway. And for this, I'm actually going to increase the size of this wall a little bit. So it's going to be 2.2, 2.2, 2.2. Yeah, so that just makes it pretty much even with the walkway. And I'm also going to move back this part of the wall. So for this, we're going to select the cobblestone, obviously, the back wall, and the front wall that's below. And this one is walkway 1. And now I want to have a variation of this walkway so it's not the same exact wall being shown every single time. And so to do that, we're going to right click under level. We're going to break. Just level 1 is fine. Break level instance. Yep. And then we're going to rotate this 180 degrees. I need to reposition it slightly, a little bit further up. And that way we're going to have some variation in the walkway. And same thing with the cobblestone here. So I can rotate this to -90 and I'll reposition that. For the cobblestone, I'll just lower it slightly. So now we select all 3 again. And this one is going to be walkway 2. So now we need to create a walkway where there's going to be a door here on the left-hand side. So there's not going to be a wall there. So for this, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to level, I'm going to break. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower this down to the ground level because it's actually going to be the ground in front of the door. And you want it to be just overlapping the cobblestone like it is there. So now I'm going to end up duplicating this 5 times. So there's going to be 6 of these extending outwards because the door we're going to have is actually going to go pretty far back into the wall. So Control-C copy, Control-V paste, we'll move it out. And for each of these, we're going to rotate them 180 degrees. So this is already 180, so it's going to be 0. And we just got to line it up appropriately. And so now I'm going to select both of these and I'm going to do the same thing. And one more. So now make sure you get all 8 pieces when saving this as a packed level actor. This is going to be door walkway 1. And the nice thing about this then is if you want, you can always create multiple variations of these. So now we're going to save our entire archway here as one piece. So now I'll select all of our trim and I'll just move that directly against each of our pillars. And make sure to line these columns up directly with the wall here. You want it slightly sticking out relative to the pillars. And then I've got to line up our arch here. So that looks good, but you see how it's actually not aligned perfectly with the trim. So if you rotate it by 1 degree, yeah, that should align it. So the last thing is we need our centerpiece here. So we can drag over our archway, just line it up to be directly flush. Just like that is fine. And for this, I noticed I actually have to change some of the things in the material. We got to change up the tiling X to be 2.2, tiling Y to be 1.4, and the offset X is going to be negative 0.17, and the offset Y is going to be 0.4. The last thing we should do is shrink this so it's not so wide. So it's the green axis here. I'm just going to set that to 0.1. And then I have to move it in a little bit. So now we got to save all of these as archway 1. So the 2 pieces here and then all the pieces of the trim. It's easy to forget one, so make sure you get all of them. And this is going to be archway 1. And I want to have another variation of this simply because it's going to be looked at a lot. And so I'm going to mix up the trim just a little bit. So we're going to right click, level, break. And so for this, it's very easy. You can just drag the trim a little bit over, same with each one, and just mix it up so that it's a little different. And now the same thing. So we select all the trim. And this is going to be archway 2. So now onto our ceiling in the interior. So here's what I want you to do. So we're going to duplicate, Control Copy, Control V, paste. And we're going to move these pillars to the other side. And then same thing for this one. And even if they're not perfectly aligned, that's actually good. It gives it some character. Last thing I want you to do with the pillars is just reverse them. All right, so now we're going to take our archway here, copy it, and then paste it. And we're going to have a second copy that we need to break apart because we're going to use each of these pieces for our interior, for our ceiling. So the first thing is the actual arch. So let's move that in, move it over. We're going to position that directly on the capitals, just like this. Just make sure it's centered properly. You want the corners to be right up against the edges. And so now we'll duplicate that. We're going to flip it around. So rotate it, what is that, 181 degrees? Yeah, perfect. And you want to align it directly with this arch. So I'm going to move it over slightly. So the next thing is copy, paste the arch again. And this we're going to rotate 91 degrees. And we're going to position it on this side. And so for the arches on the side here, you see they're not quite reaching because my pillars are on the edge. So what we're going to do is we're just going to stretch them out slightly. So the red axis here is going to be 1.3, and that should be just fine. And actually this one needs to be 89 degrees, and then I'll copy and paste it, move it to the other side, and just move that into position. And this one's going to be negative 89. So now I've got to do something unique for the back one. So if you select this back arch, and we're going to duplicate that, and we're going to move it to be right about here. And we're going to do the same thing again, but select both, copy, paste. So we're going to have 4 arches. And the reason we're going to do that is because there's going to be a doorway right here. And I actually really like this pattern where there's kind of like ridged edges here, but it's up to you. You could bring them closer together if you don't like that design. So now I'm going to select all 7 of these and same thing. So this I'm naming inner 7 arches. So now the backdrop. So we take this and move it into position. And you see for the smaller arches, it's actually a little bit too big. So we're going to shrink it a little bit. So the red axis here, we're going to shrink it to 0.93 and then lower it. And you want to actually bring that close to the edge of the arch. And so now I'm going to duplicate it, move it to the other side. Same kind of thing. You want it sticking out just a little bit. So now duplicate it again, rotate it 90 degrees. Actually, they're still shrunk a little bit, so let's try 0.96. Yeah, that's looking good. So then I'm going to copy, move it over. The one issue we do have here is you notice that these are sticking out the edges. So we got to slice off these edges just slightly. So if you select that, we're going to go over to our modeling mode. I'm going to do a plane cut and rotate that 90 degrees and then move it out. And just to about there, that should work. And then the same thing for the other side. So plane cut, just rotate it in the other direction to about there. And so now with these pieces, you need to resize them. So I'm going to make it back to 1 and just move it properly into position. The last thing is we notice that the cracks don't line up properly. So we can change the material a little bit to line that up. So I'm going to change the offset here to just 0.5 for the X. And then the cracks will line up almost perfectly. And so now we need a trim line along the top of the interior ceiling there. And so for that, I'm going to take a couple of my trim pieces here. I'm just going to move them into position. And you want them slightly sticking out and just extend them the full length of the wall, just like that. So that looks good. And I'm going to save this as a packed level actor. So right click, trim line 1. And again, I can duplicate, Move it to the other side. Rotate it 180 degrees. And now the third and fourth. Rotate these to 90 degrees. And these are not going to be long enough, right? Because this part's longer. So we got to break the pack level actor. Still going to move it into position. Then I can take one of these pieces, just duplicate it, move it to the edge. So now you know what's coming next. Select all of them, level. This is our trim line 2. So at this point, I'm just going to check the unlit mode. Yeah, I can see that it's lined up appropriately, but I also like dragging in a point light like we did a couple episodes ago. So I'll come up to here, go to lights, point light. All right, the last piece for our ceiling. So for this, we just need a basic cube. So we'll go right back to basic. Oh no, it's under shapes, cube. And this cube's going to be 4 by 4 by 0.2. Move that over and up. And you want to move that down, but not too far down. Right about there. And so for the ceiling, this is going to be a new material. So this is going to be MI Roman Mosaic. And it's the top one here. Now we got to change up this material a little bit to not be so stretched. So if we go into the material, the tiling is going to be 3 by 1.5. All right, so now we've got to save all of this as a pack level actor. We've got our roof, but we also have our 4 different trims. Select each of those. And then we also have our backdrops, 4 of them. And this is going to be ceiling 1. Now we can just move that over and make sure, yep, that looks good. So now on to our roof tiles. So we have our tile way out here in the distance. I'm going to drag it over to our main apparatus. And with the roof tiles, a few quick things. So make sure the scale is 2 by 2 by 2. Also make sure you've enabled collision, and also make sure you've enabled nanite. So I'm going to rotate this roof tile negative 90 degrees so it's facing that way. And then what we need to do is we need to duplicate it many times. Copy, paste, and you position it slightly above. You want the edge of the roof tile just barely like that over the lip. So there's like a little lip right there. You want it just over the lip, just like that. And then when you do that, you copy both of them, paste, and do the same exact thing. So we're going to end up with a total of 16 of these in one line. Yeah, and if it's like that, just make sure to move it up right like that. You want them to be exactly identical. All right, so now that we've got all of them, we can select every single one, make sure to get all 16, and we're going to go over to modeling mode. We can actually merge all of these into a single mesh via this mesh merge feature. And I'm just going to make sure I navigate into the roof tile folder so that it's going to save here. I'm going to write to a new object, and I'm going to title this roof tile line 16 and accept. That's it for modeling mode. And so now if you navigate back to your content drawer, you should see this static mesh right here. You can double click and you can actually see that. So now we've got to duplicate this line 16 times across. Same kind of thing. So we just got to line it up exactly. So I would give it basically a 1 unit gap, just like that. And then we'll select 2. We'll do the same exact thing. And then 4. And then finally copy the 8 and we've got our 16. And the one aesthetic issue that we're not going to take care of this episode is the fact that every single tile looks exactly the same. Now at a far enough distance that looks fine, but close up you can tell. So next episode we're going to take care of that via a new feature called Quixel Mixer. So now we select all 16 and we're going to do a pack level actor. And this is going to be roof 16 by 16 tiles. So now we've got our last roof tiling issue, and it's a little bit more complicated. So we have to do curved tiling across the whole arch here. So for that, I'm going to navigate back to my walls, back to roof tile. I'm going to drag in a single one, and just make sure to scale it up again to 2 by 2 by 2. So we're going to position it on the bottom left-hand side of the arch, and we're going to change our rotation a bit. It's going to be negative 90 again, and the X is going to be negative 65. And that should line it up all the way at the edge of the arch. And so this looks good, but you'll notice that the angle of it relative to the arch is a little bit off. So we can change that to be about negative 85. And so now same kind of thing, except we're only going to duplicate this twice because the arch isn't really that deep. And then for the positioning, I'm just going to move it in 2 units like that. And so once you got your 3 pieces, just going to duplicate. And as we move these up the arch, we're going to change the positioning slightly to just orient them appropriately to the arch. And you'll also notice that the arch bends more as you go up, so you have to change the angle for each level. So this is going to be, for example, negative 60, and you want it to be positioned as close to the arch as you can without showing any of the arch. And also make sure they're aligned this way properly. Now on to the next. And I'm going to speed this up because you'll get the hang of this. And as you get close to the top, you want to start raising this angle to be 86 and then 87 and then 88. And eventually it's going to be 90, and then the angle is going to change back in the opposite direction. So there we go. Now the fastest way to select all of these is just come up to your details panel, hold shift at the very top, select all the Roman tiles. Of course, here's what we're going to do. And we're going to name this roof 3x32 curved. I don't actually know if it's 32. So now on to our walls for our roof here. So the first thing we got to do is we got to drag in a cube. So I'll go to Shapes, Cube, and move that to be directly above our arch here. We got to change up the dimensions a little bit. So it's going to be 4 by 0.2 by 3.5. So roughly the size and shape of that arch. And we got to also position it properly. So what we got to do is we got to move it to be directly flush with the archway, just like that, and also move down in the same way so that it's not sticking out, but we want it to be almost at that level. And now the material that we want to give this is, if we come down here, I'm going to give it MI Roman limestone walls, and it's going to be the one that has 2 times tiling right here. And now we can actually position our roof tiles. So let's grab those. And we're going to move those directly over the wall. And we got to change the angle to be 30 degrees. So we'll move it to about there. And up here in the red. And the roof is actually going to be scaled up a little bit. So 1.3 by 1.3. And that's if you use 16 across with the scale of the original pieces of 2. And the last thing is we want to position it so that it's just barely touching the wall. So you want to look for the wall sticking out here and then move it up slightly. And you also want it to actually overhang a little bit more. So something like that. So now we finally get to use our triangle piece here. So we're going to move it. We're going to move it up just like this. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees, of course. So the scale of our triangle, we got to change that up a little bit. So it's going to be 0.61 on the blue axis. We got to move it into position to be flush with our roof. And actually, if it's sticking out at the bottom, I'm going to change that up to be 0.62. So it looks like 0.67. So we don't want it sticking out past the wall at all. We want it directly flush. So we'll move it back and then move it up. And we notice for our rooftop, the top of the triangle is sticking out past that. So we can change this up a little bit, 1.1. And then we can just move it back. And so you want the edge of the tiles to be roughly flush with the triangle there. We're going to move our triangle in to be with the wall. So now we got to fill in the rest of our wall. So we take this front piece here, copy it, paste it. We're going to change the rotation 90 degrees. And we're going to change the scale a little bit to 1.8, 0.2, 1.8. So it's a perfect square. Now you notice the tiling of this is a lot denser than the rest of our triangle here. So we got to change that up. So if we come into our material, MI Roman limestone, but this is going to be the half tiling here. And for the triangle, it's still tiling kind of large, so I'm going to change that to a 2 times tiling. But see, now the wall is tiling upwards, so I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. And then we just need to duplicate this a few times. For the middle piece, I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees, just so that it's not identical to the ones beside it. And I'll duplicate this one more time, move it to this side. And when you see this sort of flickering, you can just move one of these pieces in a little bit. So now we need to fill in the wall for the archway here. So for that, if you come back to your content drawer, under your walls, we have this archway backdrop. I'm just going to drag that in. And the dimensions of this are going to be 1.1 by 2.0 by 1.5. So just like that looks good. And we're also going to give this MI Roman limestone. This is also going to be 2 times tiling. We got to fill in a tiny little corner piece here. So for that, I could just duplicate one of these, move it down slightly. We do have to make it smaller though, because otherwise it's going to fill in this corner. So we're going to make this, let's do 0.8 and 0.8. Actually, it's got to be a little bit larger. Let's do 1. So that's looking good, but let's check the interior. So the problem is we've got our roof tiles sticking out there. So the first thing is we got to move those out a little bit. All right, so we took care of that, but we still got a wall sticking out here. So we got to move all of these walls out. Got to select all of them, move them out just a tad, something like that. And we can move this wall over. And there we go. Now we're covered. So now we're going to take all these wall pieces and we're just going to replicate them on the other side. So there should be 6 pieces. Copy, paste, move them over. We also got to check the same kind of thing. So make sure it's not too far in that it's overlapping like that. So the last thing we do before we save our walls is I want to add a decorative strip all along the edge. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the cube, duplicate that, move it out just a tad. Scale of this is going to be 4.25, 0.01, very thin, and 0.5. And it should be exactly flush with the walls. I'm going to move it just slightly, 4.26. And so the material that we're giving this is the Roman mosaic trim. We haven't used this yet. The problem is it's really stretched, right? So let's go into the material. First thing let's do is let's rotate it 25 degrees, see what it looks like. But we're going to change the tiling a little bit. So tiling X 2.0, and you see how the line is directly in the middle. So we're going to offset that by half. So offset X 0.5. And so then the design is right square in the middle. And then the last thing, we just need to copy paste. We're going to duplicate this also on the sides. And for this, I just made the dimensions a little bit longer. So I made it 5. So it's actually a little bit more stretched compared to this one, but totally fine. Yeah, you want to make sure it's touching in the corner there. And then of course we need to save it. So make sure to get every single piece. It's easy to miss the corners and the arches and the tapestries. And we're going to name this Tower Roof. And then just to see how the final state's going to look, what I'm going to do is duplicate it and switch it around 180 degrees. Just got to align it properly right about there. And if you want to, you could always break the pack level actors and then reorient the roof so that the tiles exactly line up. But I think it's fine. The player's not going to be up that high anyway. So the last thing we need to create before we move on to the next level of pack level actors is a facade, basically this thing, but for the regular segments, for the regular pieces of our wall. So first I'm going to delete out the archway here, and I'm just going to copy and paste our trim a few times. And I need to make a copy of our front wall piece here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this overall pack level actor. I'll break it, and then I can use a piece of it. So I'm going to take the front wall piece, line that with the trim, and we're going to rotate this -90 degrees downwards. So right here, -90. And I'm changing the scale a little bit. It's going to be 1.2, 0.2, and 4.5. And now we're finally using our small square pillar over here. So I'm going to move that, position that right at the corner of our trim, and we need to duplicate that and move it also to the other side. Just going to rotate this duplicate so it's not identical, 180 degrees. So now I'm going to take all of these and I'm just going to move them directly in front of the arch so we can check to see if they're lined up properly. So you want these square pillars to be aligned perfectly with the marble columns, or at least as close as you can. And I don't need the trim to be quite as long, so I'm just going to move our trim over. So now we got to change up the material that's on this. So if you navigate back to your materials, Megascan, surfaces, walls, we're going to go into the second Roman marble ornate plinth, and we're going to duplicate this material. And I'm just going to put 2x tall at the end of it. So we're changing up our tiling here. It's going to be 1 by 2, -0.1, 0.55. And now we can move that new material into our material here. And I'm also going to change the texture to be a little bit darker. So I'll go into the texture. We'll just make that 1.2, also increasing the saturation and RGB curve. So now I'm going to select all of these, including the 5 pieces of our trim. And we're going to name this segment front 1. I'm going to duplicate it because we're going to break it and make a segment front 2. Whenever I duplicate, I'm just going to rearrange this trim a little bit. And we're going to switch out the material here. So if you go back to your materials, the first marble ornate plinth. And again into this texture, and we're also going to make this 1.2, 1.2, 1.2. And again with this material, we're going to duplicate it. And we're going to put 2x tall at the very end. If I go into that, so this is going to be x1, y2, and the x here is going to be 0.65, and the y is going to be -0.45. And now we can assign that material. Oh, just make sure to rotate it. Rotation 0.25. Now we're going to save this one. And this one's going to be segment front 2. All right, we're more than halfway there, guys. So now we got to take all of our different pieces and we got to create some variations of mid-sized pack level actors. So basically we're going to have roofs, we're going to have floors and back walls of each segment of the courtyard wall. So let's start with our back walls. So I'm going to come back here and we're going to move this one out further. And we're going to start with the easiest one, which is for our stairs here. So I'm going to take our archway, drag it into position. And this we're actually going to resize a little bit. It's going to be 3, 2.5, 2.5. And it should be just about as big as the arch. We're going to drag it down just a little bit. And I'm going to bring it in so that it's all the way at the edge of this third arch here. So this is looking good, and we're finally going to use our pillar here. Just going to move that into position. And basically, we want these pillars to be flush with the rounded pillars. So if I come over here, just going to position it exactly even. And then once it's there, I'm going to duplicate it, move it over to the other side. And the reason we have these pillars is so that our intersecting walls here are going to meet it at about the halfway point, and they're going to cover all of this. And so the last thing is we need a door. So for this, I'm going to bring in a cube. And this is not a real door, unfortunately. We will get to that point, I'm sure, but this is just aesthetic at this point. So our cube is going to be 5 by 1 by 5. And for our material for our cube, it's going to be this medieval, but I always say medieval to spell it correctly, iron door. We can't really see that all that well, so I'm just going to reposition our point light. And there we go, get really close to it. We're just going to change a couple of things with this iron door. It's very dark, so I'm going to lighten it, but I'm also going to double the tiling. So if we go into the material, just change our X and Y to 2. Then we'll go into our texture here. Just make the brightness about 0.7 and the RGB curve 0.7. The key with the door is you want it to be flush with the archway. So you got to move it up, 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 up until it's all the way against it, right about there. And we also want to center it appropriately. So we want these two to be evenly spaced in the middle. So now I'm going to select our door, our archway, our 2 pillars. And we're going to save this not in the size 1 folder, but the size 2 folder, because we're moving to the next level up. This is going to be tower doorway. So now we need 2 additional variations of our back wall. So what I'm going to do is duplicate the doorway. I'm going to move that over, and then I'll right click on this one and I'm going to break it, because we want to keep our pillars here, but everything else is going to change. So I'm going to delete out the archway, delete out the actual door, and we're going to take our back wall mesh here and finally moving that up into position. I'm going to place it right about here in the midway point of the third arch. And so now to make sure I'm placing everything appropriately with the walkway, this is not going to be the walkway that's going to be with these segments. So I'm going to delete out that, go back to our content drawer. We're actually going to go back into the size 1. And for this, I want to bring in the BPP walkway 1. And I just realized an issue when we duplicated the back half of our roof. You see how it's sticking out there? So here's what I'm going to do. We're just going to break the PackedLevelActor. And this is what makes PackedLevelActor so awesome, is we can just delete those pieces because we don't need them for the back. And then we can resave that as the back roof. And I just move it out to test to make sure I got everything. And then we can right click, level, create PackedLevelActor, go back to size 1, tower roof back. All right, so now we're faced with another problem, right? Because our back wall has this big gap. But we're going to solve that easily by dragging in our castle wall here. So again, this is going to be 2.2 by 2.2 by 2.2. And we're just going to move it to be flush with the other wall. But we're going to rotate it 180 degrees just so that it varied up a little bit. So that looks good. And we're just going to do it one more time. Duplicate it, move it over. And this is going to be back to 0 degrees. And now we can move up our wall just so that it's even with the castle wall. Now onto our piscines. I have no idea how to pronounce these either. The little one first. Actually, I changed my mind. We're going to do the big one first. And we'll put this right at the base and have it be sticking out just a little bit. And you want to line up the hole in it to be even with this slit. And if some of the wall is sticking through just like this, that's good. Now we're going to do the same thing with the small one, but this is going to be at the top. So now we're going to take our pillars here, copy them, and we're going to rotate them 15 degrees. So not much at all. Just move them down and move them in. In this one, you can actually rotate it 1 degree on the Z-axis, and that's going to make it aligned with the wall much more easily. And then we're going to duplicate that, move it over. Now it's going to be negative 20 degrees. So now we're going to go back to our walls, and we're going to drag in our archway. So the archway, we're rotating 90 degrees, and we're changing the scale to 0.7, 0.3, 0.7. And this archway is going to fill in the gap between these 2 piscines. And for this, you probably want to take your point light, just drag it in, see how it looks underneath. Yeah, so that's going to be a little bit lower. And just make sure it's centered. And for this archway, we need a new material. So if you go to our Megascans, Surfaces, Walls, we have to go into this Roman limestone. And we got to duplicate our stretched material here. So I'm going to duplicate it. I'll keep the name the same, Stretched 1. Go into that. So the tiling for this is going to be 4 by 0.5. And then I'm going to assign it to our material. And so what it should look like is kind of like a wood top, but then on the sides, it actually looks like it's stone. Almost the last thing. So we've got our statues. Let's move them in. So we got to position our statues as close to the edge as we can. We're going to move them into it right about there, almost against the wall. You can tell how close it is to the wall from the shadow. And then duplicate. We'll move it to the other side. Do the same exact thing. And I realize that my archway is not centered. So I'm just going to take the statues and the archway, move them over slightly. So far, so good. We just got one more archway. So we'll take this one, copy, paste. We're going to move it up. Scale of this is a lot smaller, so we'll come up 0.5, 0.15, 0.5. So the last piece is optional, but I like it. So we're going to take this gravestone, we're going to move it over, and the gravestone is going to be positioned directly on top of here. And I'm actually going to embed it in the wall, so it doesn't appear so much as a gravestone as an emblem of some sort. And I'm going to make the scale a little bit wider. You can also push it into the wall a little bit more. So once it's looking good, we're going to save the whole thing as back wall segment 1. So make sure to get our statues, our gravestone, our back wall, our 2 pillars, our 2 piscines, and our 2 archways, and also our 2 walls down here. And these 2 pillars as well. So I think that's everything. To test that out, we can just drag it back. Yep, that looks like everything. And save that. And make sure to save that in the size 2. And this is going to be back wall segment 1. And now we're going to break it and we're going to save it as back wall segment 2 because we want a couple of variations to these back walls. And for the variations, here's what we're going to do. So we're going to switch this around, other direction. And so now instead of an emblem, it's got some Roman lettering. And we're also going to switch these 2 piscines. So this one I'm going to move down. The other one I'm going to move up. And because the bottom one here is smaller than the top one now, I've got to change the position of both our statues and this archway. So I'll move that down a little bit, move this one down as well, and I can move this one out a little bit. Quick test again. Whenever we got a lot of these pieces, just got to make sure we're getting all of them. Back wall segment 2. And actually I messed this up because I forgot to do the 2 different castle walls here. So right click, level, we're going to break. Yep. And I'll just show you what to do when you forget something. You just select your new things by holding control, so you still got all your other things selected. And then you just save it again as the same name. Create PackedLevelActor. Yep, we're just going to save it again as back wall segment 2. Yep, I want to replace it. And that's going to save it. And then this way we are all set. So now we've got our 3 back walls. So now let's do our rooftops. Now the one thing that I noticed we still haven't done is this decorative piece. So let's take care of that now. So let's move this archway into position. And for it, we want it to be roughly flush with the other one. But the problem is our material isn't sized correctly. So we got to go back to our materials under surfaces, walls, and it's our second ornate plinth here. And we're going to duplicate our first material right here. And if we go into this one, so the material tiling here is going to be 2.3 and 1.4, but the offset is going to be negative 0.28 and offset Y 0.3. So now I'm going to drag that material in, see how it looks. Problem is it's still not looking right. It's because we got to resize it. So make sure your scale is 0.9, 0.9. So the bottom of it basically looks like it's wood. And then the top, obviously we've got the limestone design. So now we're ready to save our entire tower roof structure here. So let's start by getting the interior, what we just did, and then also the arches, and then also the ceiling here. And then we'll come out and I'll get the tiles up front and then also the front facade there. And we've already got our front roof and we'll get our back roof. And I think that's everything, but let's just test it out. And we'll save this as tower roof top. And for our tower roof bottom, we actually have to switch this out because there's going to be a door here. So let's delete that. And let's instead go back to size 1. We got to bring in our BPP door walkway 1. Move that into position. It's important to get this right. So make sure it's flush directly with the stairs here. Gonna move it in just like that. So if it's looking like that, we're all set. So we can take our pillars here, these two as well, and take our stairs, and that's everything for the bottom. So right click, this is gonna be tower bottom. The one thing I realized is I actually like the look of this without having an extra wall here, so that the pillars actually stick out of the wall like you see right there. So let's go in and fix the PackedLevelActor that has that wall there right now. There's actually two of them. So we can go back to size 1, and it's this BPP walkway 1 and BPP walkway 2. So I'm just going to drag them in and break. And then once I break it, I can move this down just about there. Now we can save it again. And this is going to be walkway 1. We're basically going to overwrite it. And we'll do the same thing with walkway 2. And the only difference between these is the rotation of this back one. And so now we are ready to assemble our entire tower structure here. And I want to show you how we're going to do that. So I'm going to drag this out because this is not part of our tower structure. We need one of our back walls to do that. So I'll go to our size 2. And I'll drag in our BPP tower doorway. And it's important we line up the square pillars with our round pillars as close to precisely as we can. So move it a little bit over, check this side, and I aligned it with the third arch there, and that's looking good. So we are ready. So let's select that back piece, our front piece, and our rooftop piece. And we are going to save this as this is one of our final pieces, Create PackedLevelActor. And it's going to be in the main folder. And I'm going to name this Roman Courtyard Tower. And so now we have to create 4 courtyard segments. And these are going to be the segments that are not the towers, that are interspersed between the towers. And the reason we're going to have 4 is for variation. But that's exactly why we made 2 variations of this front panel here. And that's exactly why we made 2 variations of this back wall as well. That's going to give us 4 total segments that we can alternate. So now we can start dragging in our pieces, and then we'll rearrange. So the first thing we're going to get is our walkway 1. Then we'll get our pillar 1 and our pillar 2. We've already got our archway here, and we're going to get our roof tiles. And I'm just going to move all of these into empty space so we have some space to work. All right, so that we keep all the dimensions of these segments consistent, I'm going to break apart this one, and I'm going to use these pieces to assemble it. So we're going to go to level, we can break, and actually I'm going to break down 2 levels. So now I can delete out the stairs, I can delete out the rooftops. We're going to keep all of our ceiling, but we're just going to delete out the arch. And instead, I'll begin moving in my other pieces. 30-degree angle. And we're going to stretch these out a little bit. 1.3, 1.1, 1.3. And you see here that there's a tiny little space missing. So we want to put in a wall just to make sure it's flush with the roof. And then also to make sure that if I'm looking up into it, I can't see anything through it. So what I'm going to do for that is I'll bring in our tower roof, and I'm just going to steal this segment. So I'll break this, just 1 level, and I'll shrink this down to a Z of 2. Move it up. We want it as high as we can get it without it going over the rooftop. And then we can check down below and just make sure, yep, it's flush with the rest of it. Just got to move it out slightly. And we don't need any walls on this because these are all just going to interconnect with one another. And if they're bordering a tower, they're going to hit the walls over there. So now I can delete out our back. And before I delete out the bottom, I'm just going to switch it out with this right here. Make sure I'm aligned properly. And so now I'm ready to drag in the back. And this is actually our wall segment 2. And I'm going to start with our wall segment 1. So let's go back to our size 2 folder, drag in our wall segment 1, move this down. And again, just make sure it's right aligned with the pillars here. And that looks good. So now we just got to test it out next to one of the tower segments and make sure they match up. So if I drag in our tower segment here, and I'm just going to align our pillars exactly. And I can see here that our pillars are off. They're just not aligned appropriately. And what's really the issue is these pillars right here. And so to fix that, I'm just going to go into our BPP tower bottom, drag that in. And we need to break it, and we got to move this pillar in just a bit, and this as well. And so now I'll save this again, and we'll retest. And then I'll bring in our tower bottom. We're going to try this one more time. And now, just to test this out before I save the pack level actor one more time, I'm just going to drag it over and just want to make sure that the pillars align basically perfectly. Yeah, and that's looking good. It's, you know, slightly off, but it's never going to be 100% perfect. And what we can also do is do the same thing on the other side and make sure it's aligned. Yeah, so the other side I can see here is a little bit off. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this pillar out just a little bit to the left here. And we'll try it one more time. Back the roof, move it over. That's looking pretty good. Move this pillar out a tiny bit more. So now I'm going to resave this packed level actor. And this is in the main folder. This is our overall tower. And now for this one, I'm going to save to 3 pieces, and then we can combine those 3 pieces to make 4 variations. So we've already got our back walls, but now I'm selecting our pillars and the walkway. I'm going to right click, level, and back into the size 2 folder. This is going to be segment bottom A. So now I'm going to save our 3 different portions here. Our back wall, which we've already saved, but then the bottom and then the top. And the top is going to have 2 variations because we're going to interchange that with the 2 variations of our back wall to have 4 different versions of this overall segment. So the first thing I'm going to do is select our 4 pillars and the bottom. And this is going to be called segment bottom. And make sure you're in size 2 for this. And now I'm going to select our ceiling, our arches, our front portion, and then also this wall that we smuggled in there, and our rooftop. Just to make sure I got everything, I can drag it all out. Nope, we missed something. So we also got to get that interior arch. So this, we're going to save. So this is going to be our segment rooftop X. And so now we're just going to substitute out this front portion with the other one. Break. And then under the size 1 folder, we'll drag in our front 1. Move that up. I'm just going to position it exactly in the same location as the other one. Yeah, just like that. Delete out the other one. And then we're going to save the same thing, all the pieces. Got to test that again, drag it out. Forgot the same thing. Select that. And this is going to be segment rooftop Y. All right, now you heard me say we're going to have 4 variations of these. So we got our segment 1 and our rooftop Y. So I'm going to select all 3. And in the main folder, it's going to be Roman Courtyard segment 1Y. And we can break it. I'm going to drag in the X. And before I delete the Y, I'm just going to position it exactly. It's important to get the positioning here exactly right, or as close as we can. And now select all 3. Right click. And this is going to be Roman Courtyard segment 1X. Same thing, 2 more times. Almost got it. Break. We got to switch out our back wall here. It's going to be segment 2. And this one is going to be 2X. And we'll break it one last time. And now we'll drag in our rooftop Y and reposition that instead of the X. We'll save our last variation. 2Y. Now for the moment of truth. We got to drag in each of the segments and we got to see how well they line up with each other and the tower. So at segment 1X, segment 1Y, got to line them up exactly. Segment 2X, segment 2Y. And you know, we could even potentially have these segments not overlapping, but just really close to each other like this. That doesn't look terrible, right? Like it actually lines up the rooftops pretty well. But I think it does look better if you line them up directly over the pillars. All right, let's move in our point lights. See how this looks. I'll just duplicate our point light a few times. So now the true test. Our frame rate's good. How does that look? Oh man, looks pretty solid. And actually our frame rate is only as low as it is because of the 4 point lights that I put in here. Actually 5 point lights, because every time you add a light to a scene, it has to recalculate. Yeah, some of these walls aren't aligned properly. You see, some are higher than others. But I kind of like that disjointedness. It gives it a more realistic feel. can also see how the archways come together. They don't come together perfectly, but pretty well. Not obviously off. The only thing I really don't like is that the front facade all looks the same. So you see how these look exactly the same as these, So basically, I think I need to go in and rotate up the pillars a little bit. Also rotate these walls for 2 of the 4. And that should vary it up. So here's the end result. I basically flipped the walkway, moved out some of the plinths, and yeah, gives it some variation. So now we are ready to try this out. I'm gonna move out our fake walls, and instead I'm gonna start dragging in some actors here. So we gotta position our stairs wherever we want the path to intersect with them. Don't worry about the foliage for now. Let's position all of our pieces first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save off different variations, different combinations of the 4. And I'm going to name these big Roman courtyard segment 1 and go from there. And there's actually 4 times 3 times 2, 24 variations between the 4. So now I can just break this one and then I'm just going to rearrange the pieces. And now I can save this as a mega segment. You can call it whatever you want. I don't know how many levels we've got now, but this is the beauty of these. Basically like Lego blocks. Mega Roman courtyard segment. And so now that we got our mega segment, duplicate it, rotate it 45 degrees, move it over there. This is the key. I gotta see how these intersect because I have no idea how this is gonna work. Gotta move out the wall, see how this looks. We've got a couple of pillars in random locations we're probably gonna have to break. Let's pull in a point light. You know, that is not too shabby. So I think we gotta make the back walls connect. You know, I might literally just keep that exactly as is. Like a little X there with 2 different pillars. I kind of like that, especially with it intersecting in the middle there. That looks kind of neat. Like all these different archways coming into the one giant pillar. Yeah, I'm digging it. You know, worst case scenario, we could always break this and then we could just delete out the pieces we don't like the red tiles here. But in general, I think we keep this as is and then we just clean it up after the fact. So I just want to show you real quick what this ends up looking like at dusk. So if you set your directional light to be something like -175 degrees, that's going to put the sun way down at the horizon. Yeah, pretty nifty. Last thing I want to show you guys is what I ended up doing where the rivers actually meet the walls. So if I come down here, I should be able to show you this. Yeah, so I just basically built a very simple tunnel, made it into a packed level actor, put it in all 4 of the corners. In about 2 episodes, we're finally going to get to our real rivers here, so hang tight. And one very, very last caveat is that I ran into an issue that, honestly, I tried a whole bunch of things to fix, and I couldn't fix it. I do have one idea, but first I wanted to run it by all of you to see if there's an easy thing that I'm just overlooking. And that is the fact that these roof tiles start doing weird things when I zoom out to a far distance. So if I start zooming out here, so watch what happens. Right now it looks fine. If I zoom out, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out, and the other side of our garden, oh, they start going transparent. There's some sort of threshold where the mesh starts changing at a certain distance, and I don't know what's causing that. The one thing I discovered is that if I set the scale of these roof tiles to be a lot larger, like maybe a scale of 5 instead of 2, it's probably not going to have that issue. So if anyone has any ideas to fix this, I'm all ears, but otherwise, that's what I'll probably do. But other than that, guys, like I said, this is the last art, last design episode for quite a while. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.